Hi, everybody, and welcome to the webinar on resilient leadership today. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Claire Martin. Some of you, I think, know me. I recognize a few names, so it's lovely to have you here if we've met before in training or actually in coaching as well. So the aim of today is to focus on techniques and ideas around really improving your well-being and, as a result, sustaining that level of peak performance, whether that's in your work life or outside of that in other areas of your life. Resilience is talked about lots in the workplace and sometimes misunderstood and sometimes, I think, misused. It's not all about bouncing back instantly. It's not about not being affected by things, but there are really strategic tools that you can use to build up that ability to come back from adversity, to manage difficult situations without it having a long-term impact on your well-being, on your health and your performance. So those are the kind of ideas that we're going to focus on today. And I'd really love to see who's in the chat box as well. So please, if you've joined us, just say hi and where you're from and what your role is. It'd be nice to know who's joined us today. So I'm going to go through some really specific ideas, actionable advice, things you can take away from the session, maybe to use with yourself, maybe to use with your teams, or even wider than that, perhaps with your family. I will tell you at the end around some of the coaching I do with resilient leaders, a sort of specific program that I offer currently, and I make sure there's time at the end for Q&A. So if you have any, I might not see them as they come up all the time through the chat box, but please enter them and we can kind of go back to them at the end. And I'm also offering at the end of this session a chance to speak with me for free for 20 minutes if you are interested in getting a little more clarity and taking some of the things we've covered in the session a little bit further and perhaps finding out about any further coaching with me. Hi, Emma. Hi, Emma, Lizzie, and Joel, all from the same place. So thank you for joining all on one call. Please, if you've just arrived, say where you're coming from, what your roles are in the chat box, just to give me a little bit of insight of who's on the call with me today. And thinking about what it is that you would like to get from this session, because you've turned up, you've given up an hour of your time, potentially over your lunch break. So let's hope you're eating as well and drinking something so it's still good for your well-being. But what would you like to get from the session? I've obviously got a few core aims, things I'm going to cover. But I really want to make this personalized for you, even in a group setting. And the only way we can do that is for you to decide what is it that's useful to you. What for you would you like to get out of this? What does it mean to you to improve your well-being or to increase your resilience? Thank you. Got some other people saying hi. Aisha from OpenReach. Dave is here as well. Team leader. Thank you so much. Keep the chat coming in the chat box. It's nice for everybody else to know who else is on the call as well. So when I'm working with clients and my coachees one-to-one or in bigger training, I do a lot of corporate training as well. So going into organizations and trying to help leaders think more strategically about resilience, how they can support their teams. But I often have to pull them back and say, okay, but how do you look after yourself first? Because I will hear things they'll be talking about, maybe they really love their job, they're really, really focused, but they'll talk about waking up in the middle of the night and their mind is racing about this next thing. And sometimes it's exciting things, sure, that's fine, but sometimes it's not. It's the problems and the struggles. And it usually is impacting their well-being on a long-term basis because they're not getting back to sleep after they're waking up in the middle of the night. Sometimes people will literally deny the possibility that they could switch off from work. And there's a variation of what we mean by switch off. Having a break, a mental break, an emotional break, and a physical break from work is really important. So we try to transform some of these statements. If somebody's saying that they cannot do something, there's instantly something to discuss there. There's too much going on, and I'm firefighting. I hear this one a lot with leadership. People are giving everything to everybody else, and people are coming to them for problems and discussions and thoughts, and they are therefore not getting time to do the things that are important to them or even necessary within their role, whether that's kind of being more strategic. So I see it so often, and a lot of my experience working with clients is they love what they do. They love working in leadership. They love supporting people. They're great at that. That's why they've got into those positions. And I'm hoping that some of these things, are relevant to you on the call. I can hear and see in the chat box, lots of you are in leadership positions. Loving what you do isn't always enough. We've still got to look after ourselves, because otherwise we get to this point where we're just so tired we can't give anymore. So we want to pull back from that. We want to stop that getting to that point. So when I talk to people about resilience, I talk to people about well-being, a lot of people, it's being talked about all the time, right? It's all over the internet, it's all over LinkedIn. A lot of you have come and found this session from being on LinkedIn. But when it comes to actually making things work, I see a lot of people doing things that aren't actually following through. They're not really getting the results they want. And often it's because they're not getting any support or guidance along the way. There's tons of information out there, but they're a bit bombarded and a bit overwhelmed by it, and it's not all right for them. I also see people using wellbeing tools as plasters. And what I mean by that is, yes, and I promote doing small things, and I'm going to give you some examples of this today, to give ourselves a boost in positive emotions, to make ourselves feel better, to give us a mental, emotional break from maybe the stress or strains of today. But if we're talking about that bigger overall well-being piece and leading toward peak performance, so actually really being at our best and thriving, if we are ignoring the problems and the stresses and strains in our life, and we're just like avoiding them with a little bit of well-being tools here and there, it's not going to get to the core of it. So people are really failing to address what might actually be holding them back from moving forward and really finding that peak performance, so that, that space of thriving, which is what I'm going to talk to you a lot about today. And that's that concept. If we're only aiming to not get to the point of burnout, we're missing out on this whole amazing space, which is much more focused and driven, and yes, positive. It's helping us move towards thriving. But if we know what thriving looks like, we are instantly moving in the right direction. Okay, we might not be there, we might have a lot of work to do, but if we're only avoiding the worst possible case, that puts most people into a place of survival, not into a place of thriving. And so what I do with my clients, what I see time and time again, is how do we move from that, I'm surviving, I'm performing, but I'm not really well while I'm performing. And this is the piece, that I hear as well is around guilt. I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but this sort of feeling that I shouldn't need help, or I should be able to do it all by myself. So I don't know if any of these resonate with you. If they do, and some of you are being active in the chat, which is lovely, so thank you for introducing yourselves. Just put, maybe the number, is it 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Do any of these resonate with you? Do you catch yourself sort of thinking these things, or you've done these things and that's maybe why it hasn't worked for you either? Okay, 2, definitely. Yeah, 4. So yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? These are common things. I'm seeing them a lot. And for me, what I want is to help pull people back from this, to find those solutions that really work. So why would you focus on your own well-being? As a leader, you are probably focused on the well-being of your teams, of your people. And and that's important. I hope you truly believe that. And it's interesting, someone's just put tick a box. Why would you focus on your own well-being to tick a box? I hope for many leaders, it's not just ticking a box. I unfortunately have gone and run training in organizations where I've seen that be the case. And for me, that's obviously disheartening, because it's something I truly believe in. What I want to see is that people recognize, as a leader, if we look after our own well-being, we can really start to support other people around us. So this model here, I want to introduce to you, it comes from the field of positive psychology and coaching psychology. And the idea behind it is to get us to recognize this connection between well-being and performance. It's an evidence-based model. There's a lot of research behind it, for those of you who are interested. I'm just going to quickly talk you through it. So you can see that this quadrant model is highlighting that we've got well-being on one axis, from the vertical axis, high to low, and then performance on the right, high to low. And the top right is described as thriving. This is a space when we're at our best, we feel good. Everything's kind of working. We feel maybe challenged, but able to cope with it, and we're looking after ourselves. So it's a very healthy space to be. You can see on the top left, if our performance is lower, so maybe we either in an organizational setting are not being allowed to evolve or develop, or personally we're not really pushing ourselves, we might be looking after our well-being, but we might be quite disengaged. And as a leader, you might see this with some of your teams. Okay, they might have a pretty nice situation in a work environment. You might be supporting them really well. They might be looking after their well-being. They're quite good at doing that in a personal sense, but they're also not pushing themselves. And so there's still that space to develop and evolve. If you look in the bottom right, you can see it says surviving. Now, I do end up working with a lot of people who start in this space. They are still high performing. So from a workplace context, people see that they are brilliant at their job, they're getting everything done, they're achieving, they're supporting their teams, their people, but they're not looking after themselves. And so what I come in to support them with, and what I see is the most important thing for them at that stage, is actually starting to prioritize well-being, not at the expense of performance, but so it's aligned with what that peak performance looks like for them. Because if we don't work on that space, what we end up in is the bottom left, and this is space of struggling, where somebody, and varying degrees of struggling, but it could be to the point where somebody's off work. Certainly their performance has dropped in a workplace context. Their well-being is starting to impact probably their physical and their mental health. So I introduced this model, one, to invite you right now to reflect. Where are you on this model right now? If you were to draw this really quickly, scribble it on a piece of paper and put an X, where are you at? You can share in the chat box if you want. You can keep it completely private if you prefer. But I really urge you, just take a moment to reflect. Where are you at on that model right now? And this tool as a reflective process is amazing, because very rarely do people ask us this question. And even less often do we stop and answer it. You can use it with your team. It stops you necessarily having to have the emotional language to describe it. Somebody you're speaking to might not be able to describe how they're feeling, but something simple as this, maybe that gets out, opens up conversation. Thank you for some of you who are posting in the chat box. And what you'll find is that you're not in one box, right? We change, we move. As someone says, somewhere, Dave said, somewhere pinging between happy but disengaged and surviving, depends on external factors, and occasionally thrive, right? That's the reality. Most of us are moving in different spaces. But what I strive to have for myself personally, and I know this has worked for me time and time again, because I too move around this quadrant, is knowing what helps me move from that feeling of survival back into thriving. What helps me move from being, okay, I'm happy, but I'm not really engaged with my work, my business, what's going to really get me engaged and involved? What do I need to do to move back to thriving? And what are my rescue remedies if I feel like I'm stepping into that space of struggling? Okay, so that's what I really want to talk to you about today, because it's not just about avoiding burnout, but it's actually saying, how do we learn to thrive? How do we move forward and progress in that space? So we're going to look at some of the core things that I keep seeing my clients come to me because of. And I hope that, some of these resonate with you. It'll give you that idea of what you could do to take forward. So people who are busy firefighting, this concept of we're basically giving time and energy to everybody else except ourselves. So even when you've got your work list, your workload, your to-do list, somebody knocks on the door, and that might be virtually, sending you an email, sending you a message on Slack, whatever your, on Teams, whatever your way of communicating is, and we address that first. Now, sometimes that's absolutely essential. Sometimes it's going to have to become a priority. But what I encourage people to do is start stepping out from it and start doing what I describe as strengths-based leading. And strengths-based leading is looking to start with at understanding and knowing more about who you are when you're at your best. And I'm going to break this down into into different parts as we go through this webinar, so that you can start to try and implement some of these to really take that space of surviving. So busy firefighting is very much in that survival box for me, and move it into this space of thriving. Sacrificing well-being, way too common. How often do you, when you get really busy with work, sacrifice either eating, hydrating, exercise, or socializing? I don't know, which is your favorite one to stop doing? Is it, you skip lunch, or you don't, remember until like 5 o'clock, you haven't drunk any water all day, or you were going to go for that run at 5 o'clock, but you're too busy, so you work through. or you're so tired at the end of the day or the weekend, you don't go out and meet up with friends or family. So, please share in the chat box again, what are your things that are stopping you creating that space of like a work-life fulfillment? And that's really what I want to talk about today. It's not just about a balance. People talk about work-life balance. Some people don't like that phrase. And often it's because it's as though you've got to have this perfect scales that get to this point where everything's just spot on. But actually, if we can be fulfilled in our work and really fulfilled in our life outside of work, then we actually create that space of thriving. The other thing is going it alone. This is something I hear a lot, and in my experience, it only gets us so far. I mean, personally in my experience, but also with all the clients that I've worked with. So I'm helping you and I'm encouraging you to think about something that I describe as appreciative accountability. Again, I'm going to break this down into core elements of what does that mean and how might you achieve it. So I've done this in lots of different settings. I go into person, do lots of training. You can see some clips on that screen there of photos of me working with groups. I do a lot of one-to-one coaching, but I also go into training rooms in big global companies, in educational and charities. So I am hoping to bring you some of those snippets of what I've done and do with my clients, as I say, in one-to-one and in bigger corporate settings. And that some of that is going to become useful to you. If you're not already connected with me on LinkedIn, grab your phone, open up the camera and scan the QR code and send me a connection request. I'd love to connect with you if you're not already. I share all sorts of things regularly every week around really keeping you on track, getting you to think, asking questions, reflective tools, and often mini guides to support different areas. So hopefully some of that will be useful for you. So moving forward into this idea of your full potential. Are you ready to focus on your full potential? What does that even mean? What does that look like to you? If we're talking about thriving, we need to have something to aim towards. What is it that we actually want? So the first element I described to move away from being busy firefighting is this idea of a strengths-based leading. So strengths-based leading, as a resilient leader, understanding and knowing what your strengths are absolutely essential. So the first step is a strength psychometric. It doesn't have to be, but it's the way that I work with my clients is to get them to do a psychometric, because for starters, it gives them a language around what their strengths are. And you'd be amazed, and the research suggests, Gallup research suggests that most people do not know how or have a language to articulate what their strengths are. We get it drilled into us for interviews, from when we do our very first interviews, leaving school, to talk about our skill-based strengths. So we talk about like what we're good at, but we don't get taught to really engage with who we are when we're at our best. So our strengths from a character perspective are to describe, that I'm really good and I'm energized by developing other people. Or I have a real detail orientation. And so when I use that, it allows me to focus in on what's actually needed to make a project come to reality. Maybe I can hone into my prudence strengths. So I'm looking at all the potential pitfalls and I'm able to come up with a plan to mitigate them. So it's really honing in on what that looks like. So a strength psychometric is a nice way to start. The next thing is really understanding that and delving deeper. So one of the things I do with all of my coachees is introduce different strengths interventions. Some of these are to start with getting to know our strengths, so playing around with them a bit more, but also we use them to say, okay, what do I actually want things to look like? I've included in there also looking at a priority matrix. Not necessarily the newest tool on the block. Some of you will have seen it before. But one of the things if we're firefighting constantly is we need to know and understand what is important to us, what is urgent, non-urgent, and simply not important. And that's around looking at your values as well as your strengths. And so bringing those three things together creates a space of strengths-based leading, not just for you leading other people, but you leading yourself. Okay, so how do we manage ourselves? And you'll find that when you look at strengths interventions, it's very powerful to take us forward to support other people. And this is what I did with one of my coachees, Sheila. And she very kindly, and it's her real name, she actually encouraged me to share her case study with you, because she's had coaching with me and found real benefit from it. And she came to me very much, and she, in her own words, if you read her testimonial on LinkedIn for me, at that point of burnout, she knew that she wasn't managing. And she really wanted to boost her well-being, really wanted to support herself and move forward. But she also managed a team of people. So she also had this sort of sense of responsibility that she needed to be there for them and look after them and help them. And, from a performance perspective, she was in a management role where she needed to be high performing. She needed to meet certain metrics and achieve certain things in her role. And she wanted to, from a personal perspective. So I used a strengths psychometric, and the one I use is Strength Scope. I'm a Strength Scope practitioner. So it's a very, very work-focused language as well, which is really nice. And it's one of the few UK-based psychometrics that exist. So if you have used a Strength Scope psychometric, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If you've ever done any kind of personality profiling, it's similar, but it puts you less into a box. So some of the things like Myers-Briggs or insights, like insights might, you might be a red person or a green person or a blue person, whereas a strengths psychometric really outlines who you are when you're at your best, and it's very unique to you because it's a unique combination of 24 strengths. I don't have time, obviously, in this session to allow you to do a strength psychometric and feedback and have a discussion on it. But I do want to start and just introduce an intervention which is strengths-based, that is the beginning of this process. And it's something that with Sheila, I was able to do and talk through her strengths around to give her that vision of what does this mean? Like, what does it actually mean when you get a strength psychometric? How do I apply this to my life? So just take a moment now to reflect and ask yourself, at my best, whatever that means to you. For me, at my best is like a moment in time when I'm kind of on fire, like I'm buzzing, everything's flowing, everything's working, everything's going the way it should be. And, you maybe in the moment you don't know it, but afterwards you're like, yeah, that felt good. I did what I was supposed to do in that moment. So I want you to think of a time, and it could be last week, it could be this morning, or it could be 10 years ago. It doesn't matter the time frame, but I want you to think of a moment in time and in your work where you felt like that. Like everything was flowing, it was just coming to you, like the knowledge was there, or it felt easy to do that task. Not because the task was easy, but because you were in that moment, you were totally in the zone. And thinking about that situation, what we want to do is hone into, who were you in that moment? Were you being particularly optimistic? Were you using critical thinking skills? Were you showing a huge amount of compassion to perhaps the other person in that situation that you're thinking of? Perhaps you were really confident in that moment. You brought some bravery or honesty to the situation. And it's when we hone in on these things that we really start to get a picture of who we are when we're at our best. And you might not be feeling your best today. I don't know what's going on for you this morning or this week or this month. I hope you're feeling great. I hope you're having a fantastic day so far, but you might not be. And one of the things we do from a strengths-based leading perspective is really start to hone in on specific interventions, specific tools to say, okay, this is who I am when I'm at my best. So if I'm not feeling at my best right now, what are the steps to get there? Okay, it's not magic. It's not some kind of like pill you can take, but it is very strategic and very specific, because once you actually understand that, and I have like my strengths literally next to my computer right now as I'm talking to you, their honesty and bravery and judgment. And if I use those in the right combination, it allows me to move forward and actually focus and achieve the things I want with a lot less energy and much greater chance of success. So have a think about, for you, maybe some words. What words come out? And if you'd share them in the chat box, that'd be lovely. I can see some people are engaging. It's lovely to have you, Rachel. Thank you for letting me know that Sheila was your mentor, which is why you're here. So that's lovely that she's recommended you come to the session. So please, let me know in the chat box, if you could think of one or two words that describe your character when you're at your best. thinking back to that time. Now, for some people, if it was 10 years ago, you're thinking, oh my God, yeah, but that's not what's going on right now in my life. I don't have that environment. It's not the situation that we're talking about. It's the person you were in that moment. And that person is you still now, today. It's just saying, how can we apply that to the situation I find myself in? Even if the situation I find myself in is not ideal, especially if it's not ideal. So if I find myself in a challenging and difficult situation, I need to draw on my strengths even more than if I find myself in an easy, fun, like quite relaxed situation. It's probably going to be quite natural for me. Dave said, engaging, understanding, compassionate, and kind. Yeah, wonderful ways to describe ourselves, right? That's someone else, Joe, confidence, myself, brave enough to share my opinion in a difficult situation. Fantastic. These are the strengths. If we can harness them when it's hardest, that's when we start to really thrive, because we're not just surviving anymore, we're not just getting through, we're actually creating something new that is positive. Okay, so the next element then, looking at work-life fulfillment. As I said at the beginning, it's not so much about creating this perfect equilibrium, it's not a perfect balance, but it's saying how and in what ways are we fulfilled, or in what ways are we not fulfilled, and looking after ourselves in those areas of our life. And again, I'm breaking this down into sort of 3 elements, 3 things that specifically I work with my clients and introduce. The first is you need to have some focus on this idea that well-being impacts your performance. Yeah, if we're going to be fulfilled in work, we need to be performing, but we also know we need to look after our well-being. In order to do that, we need to know, what does that mean? Yeah, the word well-being gets thrown around a lot. It's even spelled differently in different ways in different places. But at the end of the day, unless you've got some sort of like measure of, well, where am I at with my well-being now? And then to be able to say, where do I need to improve it, and look back and measure that, even just in a subjective measurement way, so questioning it, reflecting on it, we haven't really got a roadmap to move forward. So I'm going to introduce you to a model of well-being today to start that reflective process, and I hope is useful for you. And again, it may be a tool that you can take away and use with other people. I also give all of my clients, when they work with me in a coaching capacity or when I run training, a positive psychology toolkit. And the reason for that is we need a lot of different tools or techniques at different times. Different things are useful for different people in different ways. So there'll be core ones that we might talk about in a coaching session. I might encourage you to have a go with, but it might not be the one for you. That's okay, because the most important thing is finding something that connects with you, that feels right, and you can take forward and regularly use. And sometimes it's like a regular every day or once a week, or it's something that you can grab out of your toolkit when you need it the most. And the last thing is this, having a plan, having a performance plan. If we're talking about fulfillment, there's a key piece here. We talked about well-being and performance in the matrix. We need that balance of well-being and striving for something, feeling a sense of performance and achievement in order to have optimum well-being. So we need a plan for that. What does that look like? And that's, again, something that's really core in any of the work that I do with my clients, is to talk them through it. So I'm going to start with you just now on this in this session, talking about a well-being model. Some of you may well have come across this, which is fantastic. I don't know how recently you've stopped and reflected around your own well-being with it, but that's what I'm going to invite you to do now in this session. So the PERMA model, originally, PERMA is an acronym, as you can see. I'm going to go through each of those letters with you. PERMA originally finished at A, Martin Seligman's model that he originally published, and since H has been added, H stands for health, and you'll see why we include that now as well. So as I go through, just take a moment to reflect on where are you at right now, in your life right now, in relation to each of these categories. Because for optimum well-being, and therefore optimal performance, we want to be feeling, like we're meeting the needs of each of these categories as much as possible. So positive emotions, this refers to the idea that we need to be experiencing positive emotions regularly throughout our day. That doesn't mean we won't experience negative ones. Okay? We might be sad because something challenging has happened, that there may be loss that you've experienced. We might be angry because somebody is doing something and it's led to us to create frustration and believe that's very challenging for us. We're not trying to remove all other emotions. It's perfectly normal to experience frustration and sadness and anger and boredom, but we also want to feel joy and interest and awe and serenity and love, that level of connection we have with people. So are you experiencing, and ideally, are you experiencing more positive emotions in your day than you are negative ones? Because if you are, that's what allows us to broaden our ability to think more, more clearly. It allows us to be more creative. We're better at problem solving. We step out of survival. We step into thriving. And there's a huge body of research on this. The next one is engagement. How engaged are you? Not just engaged in a workplace context, the way that word gets used in workplaces, but literally in a moment. Do you find yourself doing activities within your workplace or at home that you feel just so lost in the moment? And I'm afraid Netflix doesn't count. So it needs to be something that's challenging us to our skill level, but also it's not tipping over into being too challenging. So we enter this state of what is described as flow state, or being in the zone. Then we have relationships. Thinking about who are your core, most positive relationships. We have relationships with all sorts of people, close family members, extended family members, neighbors, work colleagues, our bosses, etc., 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 clients. It's very broad if you think about how many people you have a relationship with, some level of relationship. What I want you to do is to hone in on what are your positive relationships, and then why are they positive? What are the attributes around them that make them positive? Because what we want to do is harness that and do more of it. If we start to reflect and think that, okay, I've got 2 or 3 positive relationships in my life, but there's a gap maybe at work, then it's an area that from a coaching perspective we might focus on and discuss and then explore further. The next one is meaning, so M for meaning, and this idea is having something greater than ourselves. We need to feel connected to something greater than self. We're social, but also for some people that might mean spiritual. So it could be connected to your family, it could be connected to something greater like a community, it could be connected and feeling and understanding the purpose and values of your workplace and how you fit into that. And that is incredibly powerful. If you've ever felt disconnected, you'll know the impact that it can have on your well-being. So we want to deliberately and actively cultivate these things. Then we have accomplishment. How accomplished are you feeling? And that doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be some major 5-year life goal that you're just about to complete. It could be the smaller things. So it could be today, what have you achieved today already? It could be this week, you have a goal and you want to achieve it. Or it might be something less time specific, but you just know you're developing and evolving and improving. Maybe you've started learning a new language on Duolingo, and you've, got a streak for how many days you've been online. You can feel accomplished with things that are good for your well-being, that don't have like any monetary value. It's not like you're being paid to achieve it. You're doing it purely for your own sense of well-being. And that's very powerful. And then the last one is health. Where are you at with your health? And that includes your physical health. So we're talking really about, your sleep. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating well for you, whatever that means to you? Are you hydrating during the day? Are you getting enough exercise? And obviously all these things are relative to you in your personal situation, in your personal health levels. But most of us kind of know we could rate that on a 1 to 5 where we're at right now. So take a moment, and if you're willing to share in the chat box the 1 or 2 top categories that you think you could do with some improvement in. Okay, I know that for me, health is a big one I'm focusing on at the moment. I've got some goals around a lot more physical exercise to develop myself, strength and aerobically. So that's a big one, but it also very nicely ties in with relationships because it means I'm meeting new people through doing these things. I went to my first ever capoeira class last week, and it was definitely a physical workout, but I also met new people. So it actually boosted more than one of my categories of wellbeing. So Dave is saying health, getting to bed too late, okay, not quite taking care of diet. So these little things, stopping, noticing, reflecting is that first step. Okay, to bring you through to the third part that I wanted to focus on today, which was moving away from this concept that I have to do everything alone. I'm a leader, I'm in charge, I should know better, or I shouldn't need to ask anyone for help, or everybody else is too busy, that kind of feeling. And moving it towards appreciative accountability. And what I mean by appreciative is in part coming from a model known as appreciative inquiry and using appreciative coaching. To get my coachees and clients to really embrace this concept, we have to look at the things that are holding them back. So anybody that comes to work with me, to some extent, put out that invite. Some people might say it's a challenge, but an invite to look at the things that are holding them back and to use, and I use a lot of work through cognitive behavioral coaching. So my background is in cognitive behavioral psychology. And I use a lot of the tools and techniques in that to create positive belief reframes. And for me personally, I know I found them incredibly powerful, but I also see those light bulb moments when I work through this with a coachee, because it's very personal, it's very specific. We look in depth at the beliefs and ideas and concepts, maybe the things that you're saying to yourself that are holding you back, and we reframe them into new kind of statements, but also we go deeper to look at the belief behind it, so that we're actually starting to shift the way we think and believe we need to behave. So we remove some of those shoulds or shouldn'ts and turn them into coulds or cans. The 5-star support is really again a tool that a lot of people have heard of, but if whether it's a star or on your hand, who are the people that you would reach out to? Going it alone in life or in your workplace for most people does not work long term. So we really evaluate and look at that. And then appreciative coaching is a big part of what I offer. And so in the coaching that I do with my clients, we have that check-in, and I'm coming from it from not a friend sitting there kind of just listening, sure, because that's what friends are good at. They listen, but they also try and give you advice, and they also sometimes just dwell with you on how rubbish everything is. And sometimes we need that, right? Sometimes we need to have a cup of tea or a glass of wine, whatever your beverage of choice is, and just have a moan. And that's quite healthy. But if we're still moaning about it in a week's time, in a month's time, the same stuff, it's no longer cathartic. We have to recognize we need to do something more. And that's where this idea of appreciative coaching comes in, and the work that I do. So after this workshop, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to offer you a booking link so you can have 20 minutes of time with me for free. And I'm going to really introduce you to that concept of beginnings of asking you around, where are you at now? So that reflective process. What are the things you might want to change, but what are your reasons behind that? What we want to do is be appreciative in the sense of, I want to delve in and understand what your strengths are, where you want to head to, and how you might get there. And part of that is going to be the barriers that are holding you back. You could do this with a friend. You could do this with a colleague. If you already have your own coach, then you're probably already doing this, which is fantastic. But as I said, in a few moments, I will give you a link to have a session with me to explore that and see if it's something that is, the beginning of that process that you might want to take forward with further coaching. So pulling all this together, how does this work in practice? I'm going to introduce you to another coachee. Matthew is not his real name, so not everybody that works with me wants to put their name out there and share what they do. I mentioned Sheila earlier because she actually encouraged me to do that. She's very open about it, and as you can see, there's somebody on this webinar who has worked with her, and she's told her about her experience through coaching and how powerful coaching can be. But this person I just want to introduce you to because I worked with him for a period of time, and it actually expanded out. I ended up working with his whole company as well because we had such a kind of a shift in experience for him and how that might then positively impact the rest of his team. He's a director in a company. It was a small company with 3 directors. He was constantly feeling like he was firefighting. And that's what's important, is how the person perceives it. It doesn't really matter what else everyone else perceives. but this person was coming to me in that place where they were struggling and it was starting to have an impact on their well-being. He knew a lot, though. Yeah, I say self-help book fanatic. He'd read a lot more books than I'd read. I have to be honest. But the problems and the gaps were that he didn't have a plan to move forward. He wasn't in a position to find the space on his own because he was firefighting. He didn't know what peak performance looked like. Nobody was having that conversation with him. He wasn't in an environment where they had a sort of setup where they were speaking to other people or getting that external support. He felt completely overwhelmed, particularly by most of the self-help books. I don't know how many self-help books you read. I often will read, a book. It might be positive psychology and even an evidence-based, not just a sort of self-help, somebody is a guru, but really evidence-based ideas. But we can still be overwhelmed by that. So it's about pulling out the things that are going to be most useful to us. He was spending a lot of time looking after everybody, but ultimately not really looking after himself. And that was a huge space that we needed to work on. And there was fears around, and this is the shouldn't thing. I shouldn't need any help. I should already be okay. I should be able to manage everything. There were fears that to not already be resilient enough to not need help was somehow going to be, I'm not competent enough in my role. And so we had to work through the kind of belief system that was holding him back from developing and improving that. So we worked together for 3 months initially from a coaching perspective, so having one-to-one coaching. And I pulled the whole model there together for you to see, these 3 different elements: the strengths-based leading, the looking at the work-life fulfillment, and the appreciative accountability. And obviously, because he chose to have coaching with me, part of that was my role to be there to help him be accountable, but also pull out and ask those appreciative questions to really find out what was going on. And we saw in just that short period of time that there was a huge reduction in his stress levels, which meant he was much more able to find time, and mostly not just time, but energy to do the strategic stuff that he was really missing. He wasn't finding the time for that because he's firefighting. He engaged with feedback better, which was a huge piece of the puzzle in communicating more effectively with his other directors and his team. And that led to, for him, what felt like thriving, but also in the time that I worked with his company, it actually massively expanded. So a company that went from having, I think, 13 employees at the time, in the year that I worked with the whole company, they had 17 by the end. And if you think for a small company, that's quite a big add-on of increase in staff. He had a massive increase in his creative work. And part of that was being able to have the conversations and feel the freedom to talk to his team more effectively, because he was starting to take this strengths-based approach. He was approaching it from where he was at when he was at his best. And that really transformed the way he approached everything. And physically, and partly emotionally, he had more energy and focus to apply to his work. So you can see how each of these things, if we pull them together, they start to have a positive impact. And for me, I talk about peak performance, I talk about well-being and resilience. It all comes together. We can't have one without the other. You've got to have somebody, it might not be me, but somebody to sit down and look at what are the tools that you need to move forward. What are the tools that are really going to help you understand what a peak performance might look like? What is it you even want? Where is it you're heading? Because you can't get there if you don't know what it is you want to achieve. You've got to have the things in place to manage the stress, because there will be stress. To get to peak performance, we have stressful encounters, we have stressful moments. Things aren't going to go our way all the time. So how is it that we can know and literally have them ready in our toolkit to pull out and support us when we need it the most? And that's partly what builds resilience. It's having these tools, it's having ways to change our thinking, it's having physiological tools, maybe through breathing techniques, to literally change our physiological response. It's looking at the emotions that may be underlying that are impacting us. It's the whole package, and thinking about some of the well-being tools. And as I say, a positive psychology toolkit that I offer is a lovely way to kind of build up that baseline set of ideas that you can pull out when you need them most. And, you know, it's a personal journey. You've got to work out what that looks like, but I'm there to support my clients to not only find out what their full potential might look like, but also create a sustainable way to manage that so that we balance that well-being and performance. That's the core importance to me, is that we don't yo-yo or go on this roller coaster of we look after our well-being and our performance drops, and then we look after our performance and our well-being drops. It's about finding this like stable, thriving position that you're still moving forward, right? You're still moving forward and progressing, but we don't have to have the huge ups and downs. So some of my clients, you can look on my LinkedIn profile, have shared some testimonials, which is really lovely. I'm really grateful to them. And if you want to delve further, you can look at that and find out a little bit more about me. As I said at the beginning, my LinkedIn profile shares lots of different things on there, and tools and ideas that you might be interested in. For some of you who haven't yet downloaded my free toolkit, it links into the PERMA model that I went through with you earlier. I'm just putting it in the chat box for you now. So if you are interested, there's it's a really simple tool, but it's focusing on those PERMA categories for wellbeing, and that would allow you to maybe think of one or two ideas that maybe pulls things out. They're just quick, simple interventions, but it's amazing how one or two of those will make that difference in the moment when you need it the most. So download it if it's useful to you, share with others if it is as well. Okay, so kind of moving through to this final idea of, you know, started with, you know, this webinar is called resilience and resilience for leaders. So the first thing I want you to take away is that your well-being is completely linked to your performance. We cannot have one without the other. Like, we actually can't have optimal well-being if we're not performing well, because we need that sense of accomplishment. We need to feel like we're doing well in the things that we're doing. So whether that's in the workplace or in our life in general. So making that first choice to recognize that the two are linked. Then is being ready, and sometimes we're not, but being ready to face whatever's causing you stress or holding you back, because it's not necessarily about removing all stresses from our life. It's often about reframing them. Sometimes it is, and those are the conversations that I have with my coachees, is to try and understand that difference. I do a lot of work to reframe and think differently and create positive beliefs around a situation. But if some situations are literally causing you major stress and problems, sometimes it's about changing the situation too. Then it's having a plan. You've got to have some kind of plan for maintenance. Maintenance for your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, your psychological well-being, and maintenance for performance, right? How do we keep it up? Because it's, you know, it takes work. And just like for our physical health, we can't just go to the gym once and then expect it to last a lifetime. It's exactly the same for our mental health and our well-being. I would encourage you massively, if it's not something you've explored before, you may choose to explore it with me. If you have coaching with me, looking at character strengths and then really applying them for maximum gains. But those of you who just engaged in the chat box, even if you just kept those words that you shared with me about who you are when you're at your best, if you kept those in mind for the next time you're feeling stressed or struggling, and say, how could I use maybe one or two of these in combination right now, and how would that help me? Even if you just do that, even if that's the first step, then I encourage you to have a go and just play around with it. And then the last thing is forgive yourself, because it's not always going to be smooth sailing. Like, I get stressed. I talk about this stuff all the time. I still get stressed. I still get upset. I still get angry. I still get frustrated. And that's normal and human. It's how do we come back from it? It's having the tools and ideas and systems in place to come back from it that is most important. So what's next? What's next for you? So I already mentioned that I'm going to give you sort of an opportunity to have a call with me today. And I just want to introduce you a little bit to how I could support you further if that's something that's interesting to you. So I run lots of training, but I'm currently offering a coaching package, which is a 3-month package, and I have a few spaces because it's one-to-one. I can only take on a few people. But the idea of it is very focused on resilience for leaders. And it's this, everything I've covered today, this idea that we're bringing together, there is sort of strengths-based leading, the work-life fulfillment, and the appreciative accountability to get you to that place and maintain that space of thriving. So if you are looking to kind of get some support to build that resilience and sustain performance, or you're interested in learning evidence-based tools that really boost your well-being and personalizing them to the ones that are going to work best for you, and having that ongoing coaching support, that kind of appreciative process, then this coaching package I think could be really useful for you. So if you want to explore it more, it's £219 a month for 3 months as a coaching package. And if you want to explore it more, it's something that I can talk to you about in a call, if you book a call with me at the end of this. It very much encompasses everything, as I say, I've talked about today. That model I'm showing you now sort of it's not like we go through step 1, 2, 3 to 9. It's all pulled together and personalized to you so it makes sense and supports you on your journey. So the coaching program will allow you, and absolutely this is what I've seen with my other clients, it reduces stress and the overwhelm about looking after yourself. It will help you avoid burnout, not just so we avoid burnout, but to get to that place of thriving so that you might progress in your career, so you can achieve the things you want to achieve. You'll have more energy to engage with people at work, maybe more energy to support your team and people that you work with, which is what allows you to really be recognized as being great at your job. That communication piece, strengths-based leading, is all about being at your best and how you can also spot strengths in others so that you start to communicate more effectively with people. That allows them to be more at their best, to achieve their best, and you just start to see this increase in positive experiences, not just for yourself, but for others around you. And you get to create this really healthy work-life relationship so that we're not yo-yoing or on this roller coaster. We start to create this place of sustainability of performing at your highest level while still looking after yourself. So if you want to know more about it, as I say, you can book a call in just a moment. I'm going to give you the link. So it's a 3-month coaching package. It's a commitment for 3 months to work on yourself. You will get a StrengthScope psychometric report. You'll get the positive psychology toolkit I've already mentioned a couple of times. And within each month, you have 2 one-to-one coaching sessions with me. In addition is a weekly check-in with WhatsApp. And that's not me kind of badgering you, but we have a conversation about accountability and when it's most useful for you to check in with me. And we have time and space to communicate when and if there's questions or anything in between the coaching sessions that'd be useful to cover. So if you are interested in having a chat, as I said, you're very welcome to book in. It's a 20-minute session with me. I've put on slots and I put quite a lot of availability this week. So from this afternoon through to Sunday. So I do have a limit in how many calls I can take, but currently there's like lots of slots you could pick from until they start kind of being booked up. So if you would like to do that, please book in a session. You can use it to pick my brains, to have that initial conversation of where are you at? Where do you want to go? Maybe some of the beliefs or systems that are holding you back. And then like, what are the next steps? And those next steps maybe to find out more about my coaching program, or those next steps maybe to take it forward on your own because you're ready to, and that's absolutely fine. So if you'd like to book, you can grab a slot, get out your phone, you can scan the QR code, which please note, I was very excited about this QR code. It's got a gold crest, which is the name of my company in it. It's called QArt. So, being a bit geeky, sorry, but just love that. Or if you prefer to type it, you can put in bit.ly/call with Claire, and it will take you straight to my calendar. And I'm putting it in the chat box too. So there's a link if you prefer to click on the link in the chat box, and that will take you straight there. I'm being asked, is the webinar going to be available to rewatch? Absolutely. I'm going to, it's being recorded, so I will share the link with you some point after this session. So yes, Ted, the answer is yes. So any other questions? Ted's asked the first one, but if you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them. We have 7 minutes left, so we're right on track, on time. Thank you so much for joining me though. And if, again, you may have questions that you would rather have the conversation with me on a one-to-one. So please book a call and get in touch and let me know what I can do to support you and help you. But thank you for attending, and I hope you still have time to get some lunch and look after your well-being today as well.